Japanese never knew American mail could arrive in 3 days. They laughed when they first heard it, mail crossing the Pacific Ocean in just 3 days? Impossible, they said. Even generals smirked, calling it a fairy tale. But soon, Japan would discover that America had quietly built a system so advanced, so daring, that letters began arriving before the ink had even dried. And by the time they realized how it worked, it was already too late to stop it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Back in 1944, Japan was a fortress of secrecy. Every message was screened, every radio wave analyzed. They believed nothing could move between continents without being tracked or delayed. Mail ships took weeks, coded cables were slow and dangerous. For them, time itself was a weapon: delay the enemy's communication, and you delay their victory. But across the ocean, a handful of American engineers and pilots were crafting something that would make time itself bend. It began not in a war room, but in a dusty hangar outside San Francisco. A young postal engineer named Richard Hale had grown tired of hearing how impossible it was to deliver letters faster than ships or trains could carry them. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even in uniform. But his obsession with speed bordered on madness. Hale had one conviction: if planes could carry bombs across oceans, they could carry words too. Every night, he sketched designs in secret: routes, refueling stops, wind currents. His co-workers mocked him. "You think you can outrun the Pacific, Hale?" they'd say. "Even the Navy can't cross that in 3 days." But Hale didn't argue. He simply worked. Because deep down, he believed messages could win wars just as much as bullets. Then came the moment that changed everything. In late 1944, an intercepted Japanese cable mentioned an experimental courier line, something they called the Shirike's route, meant to speed military mail between Tokyo and the islands. It was an early warning system, vital to Japan's coordination. Hale read the report and said just one sentence: "Then we'll beat them at their own game." What followed was part madness, part genius. The U.S. Army gave Hale a chance: a single aircraft, stripped of all weight but a pilot, fuel, and mailbags. They nicknamed it the Comet Courier. It wasn't armed, it wasn't escorted, and it flew routes no one had ever dared attempt: straight through storms, low over waves, threading the needle between enemy radar and sheer physics. Its mission: carry coded letters and reconnaissance photos between Hawaii and Tokyo Bay, a path that would cut delivery time from 18 days to just 3. At first, even American officers rolled their eyes. Mail planes? That's your big idea? But by the end of the first week, the Comet had done something no ship or submarine ever could. It had left Hawaii at midnight, and delivered critical command orders to General MacArthur's team in Manila by dawn on the third day. 3,000 miles. No interception. No delay. Just pure, invisible speed. Hale's mail wasn't ordinary. Some of it was real correspondence, soldiers writing to their families, coded and sealed. But much of it carried the beating heart of the war: new strategies, intercepted messages, weapon schematics disguised as love letters. Each successful delivery rewrote how the Allies communicated. And for Japan, it was terrifying. Within weeks, Japanese officers started noticing something impossible. American responses were coming back too quickly. A captured document in the Philippines had barely been decoded when, 3 days later, the Americans had already countered the move. The Tokyo Intelligence Office was baffled. They rechecked transmission logs, convinced there must be spies in their own ranks. How could the Americans be acting on information that had barely left Japanese soil? Rumors spread among the soldiers, whispers of a ghost mail, an invisible system that could outpace any plane or signal. But the truth was more incredible. Hale's pilots had learned to refuel mid-air over the ocean using naval tankers that sailed in total blackout. They were the first to do it. Every run shaved hours off the clock. Every risk was a miracle. Back in San Francisco, Hale received a letter from his younger brother stationed in Guam. It read, "Your letters come faster than my thoughts, Rich. I don't know how you do it, but they reach me before I stop missing home. That line haunted him. Because while his invention was saving lives, he knew each flight could end in silence over the sea. By the end of 1945, Hale's three-day mail system had become the lifeline of the Pacific Theater. Not every plane returned. Not every pilot survived. But their deliveries, and their courage, changed the rhythm of war. Japan never saw them on radar. They never heard their engines. They only felt the consequences: sudden counterattacks, preemptive strikes, and a sense that America somehow knew what would happen before it did. And when the war ended, the truth stayed buried. The world celebrated the atomic age, but few remembered the quiet miracle that let information travel faster than ever before, the system that taught the modern world how to communicate without borders. Richard Hale never became famous. But decades later, when Japan rebuilt and opened its first international airmail hub, an old file resurfaced in Tokyo's archives. A single faded envelope, stamped U.S. Pacific Mail, 3 days. The date on the postmark stunned historians. It had arrived before the Japanese surrender. By then, it was no longer a secret. It was history, proof that words, not just weapons, can change the course of time. Japanese never knew American mail could arrive in 3 days. By the time Tokyo realized something was wrong, it was already deep into the winter of 1945. What first appeared to be coincidence began to feel like a pattern that terrified Japanese command. Every time their orders went out to occupied islands, American forces reacted as if they'd read them in advance. Troop movements were met with ambushes, convoys were intercepted, and coded transmissions, once supposedly unbreakable, were answered in hours, not weeks. Inside a dimly lit room in the War Ministry, a group of cryptographers stared at the latest report. The Americans, it seemed, were no longer bound by the sea. Admiral Kuroda, head of Japan's intelligence division, slammed his fist on the table. "Impossible," he barked. "Nothing crosses the Pacific that fast. Not ships, not radio, not even the wind." But the evidence lay in front of him, letters captured from fallen American soldiers stamped with delivery dates that made no sense. 3 days. Always 3. Kuroda ordered a full-scale investigation. "If we cannot see their planes," he said, "then perhaps they travel through our shadows." His words echoed through the corridor, unsettling even his most hardened officers. The Imperial Army began tracking every reported sighting of unidentified aircraft, every fragment of wreckage that washed ashore, every rumor whispered by fishermen. Still, nothing concrete emerged. It was as though these mail planes existed only between heartbeats. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ocean, Richard Hale's project had outgrown its hangar. The Comet Courier was now a fleet, 5 specially modified twin-engine planes flying staggered routes between California, Hawaii, Guam, and the Philippines. Pilots were handpicked from reconnaissance units and trained to operate without radio contact, relying solely on celestial navigation and coded beacon flashes from friendly ships. Hale called it Operation Mercury, after the messenger of the gods. The system's precision was terrifyingly elegant. Each flight carried dozens of microfilm letters, some personal, most operational. Refueling happened midair or mid-sea, coordination was everything. Hale's engineers developed collapsible floating runways that could be deployed from submarines, a secret known only to a dozen men. Every successful delivery shortened not just distance, but fate itself. But with each success came new danger. The Japanese Navy began deploying long-range patrol planes over suspected refueling zones. They started calling these invisible couriers the Silver Wind, a ghost that carried American words faster than bullets. Whenever radar detected a flicker of movement, searchlights and anti-aircraft fire would fill the sky. Yet somehow, the comets slipped through, silent and unseen. One night in February, Hale stood by the radio station in San Francisco, waiting for the coded confirmation of Flight 7's return. The mission had been the riskiest yet, crossing through a typhoon corridor to deliver high-priority messages about the upcoming Philippine liberation. The confirmation tone came 3 minutes late. Then silence. Then, nothing. Preparing and narrating this story took us transmission logs, so if you are enjoying it, the plane had vanished halfway home. It means a lot to us. 3 days later, now back to the aircraft washed up on a remote Japanese shore. A fisherman found a mail pouch tangled in seaweed, still sealed. It was taken to Tokyo under heavy guard. When Admiral Kuroda opened it, expecting to find blueprints or military plans, he found something else, handwritten letters, each coded in plain sight. To anyone untrained, they looked like simple love notes from soldiers to sweethearts. But as cryptographers realized the truth, the letters had coordinates and timetables. Every line of affection concealed a battle plan. For the first time, Kuroda understood the brilliance of America's deception. They had turned something as ordinary as mail into a weapon. Every delivery was a pulse of intelligence disguised as emotion. It was war masked as love. He clenched the letters in his hand, whispering, "They send their hearts to kill us." Enraged, he issued what he called Project Kite, a mission to capture one of these courier planes intact. Japanese pilots were ordered to fly at impossible altitudes, waiting for shadows that crossed the moonlight. For weeks, they saw nothing, until one night, radar picked up an unidentified blip moving east at staggering speed. 20 fighters pursued it. One pilot reported seeing a silver bird, glowing faintly, flying lower than the clouds. Then his transmission cut off. Neither the fighters nor the target were ever found. Back in the Pacific, Hale received the grim news of Flight 7's loss in the recovered mail bag. He knew the Japanese would now hunt them relentlessly. But he refused to stop. "If we stop sending," he told his pilots, "we stop believing." Those words became the unofficial motto of Operation Mercury. By spring, the American command began relying entirely on Hale's system. Even President Roosevelt's staff received correspondence through the couriers, letters arriving across the ocean before the ink of reply had dried. Yet few outside the operation knew it existed. Hale worked in silence, driven not by glory, but by the conviction that connection itself was a weapon of peace. One day, he received a letter written in Japanese, slipped anonymously into his office mail. It contained only one line, "Your words travel faster than light." But even light leaves shadows. There was no signature, no return address. Hale understood its meaning instantly. It was a warning from someone inside Tokyo. Someone who knew he was being hunted. And yet, despite the growing danger, the deliveries continued. The comets flew lower, faster, quieter. Every successful run was another miracle. Every pilot knew he might not return. And still, they took off into the endless night, carrying messages that could change the course of the war, or end it entirely. For the Japanese, it became a nightmare. Their scientists dissected the few captured mail fragments, searching for hidden technology, secret inks, or advanced encryption. They found none. The Americans, it seemed, had built not machines, but belief, a network of courage held together by human precision. It defied logic. It mocked reason. And slowly, as 1945 turned to its bloodiest months, Admiral Kuroda began to sense something he hadn't felt since the war began: doubt. Because while his empire still held islands, its lines of communication were breaking apart. And the Americans? Their letters, their orders, their voices, kept arriving. 3 days. Always 3. Japanese never knew American mail could arrive in 3 days. By the summer of 1945, the mystery of the 3-day mail had reached breaking point inside Japan's high command. Reports kept piling on Admiral Kuroda's desk, messages intercepted mid-route, strange wreckages found with burned documents, and the worst of all, American counterattacks happening with eerie precision. It was as if the Americans could hear Japanese decisions before they were even spoken. In the basement of the Naval Ministry, Kuroda assembled a new team. Scientists, engineers, and codebreakers sat around a long table covered in fragments of metal, torn envelopes, and cryptic maps drawn in English. "The Americans have built something," Kuroda began, his voice sharp as glass. "Not a weapon of fire, but a weapon of distance. If we do not understand it, we will lose the sky itself." Among those present was Dr. Satoshi Kanda, an aeronautical engineer once admired for his work on high-altitude reconnaissance. He studied the metal shards from the downed courier plane, running his fingers along the edges. "This isn't ordinary aluminum," he said softly. "It's an alloy. Lighter. Heat-resistant. American, certainly, but nothing we've seen before." Kuroda narrowed his eyes. "Can you replicate it?" Kanda hesitated. "Not yet. But if we can bring one of their planes down intact, perhaps." Thus began Operation Kite 2, a shadow mission designed not to destroy but to capture. Japanese radar stations across the Pacific were reconfigured to sweep lower, closer to the ocean's surface, where these ghostly couriers were said to fly. Submarines were positioned along likely routes, armed not with torpedoes, but with harpoon-like grapplers meant to snag the enemy's underbelly if it skimmed too close to the waves. Meanwhile, Hale's Operation Mercury was thriving, but at a cost. His pilots were flying blind through expanding danger zones. Rumors of Japanese traps reached them, yet every man volunteered for another run. They had started to treat the mission like a brotherhood, their mailbags like sacred relics. Hale himself began joining briefings, standing beside young aviators barely out of training. "You're not just carrying paper," he told them. "You're carrying hope, folded into envelopes." But Hale knew their luck was running thin. On a humid July morning, Flight 12 vanished without trace over the Mariana Trench. No radio, no wreckage, no survivors. For 3 nights, Hale didn't sleep. Then a signal came, not from his pilots, but from the enemy. A coded Japanese broadcast repeated one line in English: "Your messenger sleeps beneath the waves." He felt his chest tighten. The Japanese had finally caught one. At that same moment, Dr. Kanda stood over the remains of what once had been the fastest mail aircraft on Earth. The captured fuselage was battered but mostly intact. He and his team worked for days, peeling away layers of innovation, extra fuel cells hidden inside the wings, a unique carburetor that allowed longer flight at thinner oxygen levels, and a reinforced nose section lined with reflective material. It was both simple and ingenious, a masterpiece of human creativity. But the real shock came when they discovered the letters. Bundles of waterproof mailbags survived the crash, sealed and coded. When opened, they found not battle plans or military coordinates, but hundreds of letters written in delicate handwriting. Love notes. Family updates. Messages of faith. Kanda's assistant scoffed, "All this risk for emotion?" Kanda shook his head. "No. This is the encryption. They are using feelings as camouflage. You wouldn't suspect strategy hidden inside a son's letter to his mother." He turned the paper over and saw faint impressions, raised letters only visible under angled light. Invisible ink embossed through vibration. When decoded, each letter's indentation aligned with coordinates along the Pacific, forming a map of operations. It was brilliant, and horrifyingly effective. Word of this discovery reached Kuroda within hours. "So the Americans send love as their weapon," he said bitterly. "How poetic." He ordered that replicas be built using the captured aircraft's design. But even with blueprints, the Japanese could not match the system. Their engines overheated, fuel lines burst mid-flight, and their navigational equipment failed in storms. The secret wasn't just in the machine, it was in the men who flew it. Meanwhile, Hale's team received intelligence that their system had been compromised. "They have one of ours," a radio operator whispered. Hale said nothing for a long time. Then he stood and gave the order, "We change everything. Routes, call signs, even the way we write." That night, he gathered his remaining pilots and distributed a new kind of letter, a message from him personally, written on thin rice paper. It read, "If they can read our words, then let our silence speak louder." Each pilot was to memorize routes, destroy all physical codes, and trust only what was carried in memory. From that point, Operation Mercury evolved beyond paper. The final missions carried no written mail at all, only pilots, their minds filled with memorized orders, names, and numbers. They became living letters, human couriers whose very survival meant transmission. The Japanese called them ghost carriers because no matter how many they shot down, the information still arrived. One evening, Dr. Kanda presented his findings to Admiral Kuroda. "Sir," he said, "what the Americans built isn't just technology. It's conviction. Their system works because every man involved believes he is indispensable. We could build 1,000 planes and still not match that." Kuroda stared at him in silence, his pride dissolving into something heavier, respect. "Then belief itself is their weapon," he muttered. Weeks later, the tide of the war shifted irreversibly. Japan's communication lines crumbled. American orders and reinforcements moved like lightning. The three-day mail wasn't just surviving, it was winning. On August 10, as bombs rained over Japan and the Empire's fate sealed itself, one final letter reached Hale's desk in San Francisco. It was stamped in unfamiliar ink, addressed in precise handwriting. Inside were only 4 words, written in Japanese: "Even light leaves shadows." Hale smiled faintly. He recognized the line, it was the same warning he'd received months before. Somehow, even across enemy lines, one man had understood. He looked toward the Pacific, where the horizon burned with sunrise. Somewhere beyond it, the last of his pilots were flying home, unseen, unstoppable, carrying not just messages, but the proof that human will could outpace time itself. By late August 1945, the Pacific was in ruins. The Empire's proud navy lay shattered, its communication networks severed like veins. Japan had built its dominance on secrecy and control, but now both were gone. Messages that once took weeks were now answered before they arrived. Commanders gave orders, only to find the Americans already waiting. No one could explain how. Some blamed spies. Others whispered about invisible couriers that flew faster than radar could blink. And deep in Tokyo, Admiral Kuroda knew exactly what it meant: the Americans had outpaced time itself. For weeks, he had barely slept. The remnants of his intelligence corps sat in the basement of a half-bombed ministry building, surrounded by scattered papers and broken radios. Every intercepted message only deepened his humiliation. The Americans didn't just know Japan's plans, they anticipated their thoughts. Kuroda watched the empire crumble not through explosions, but through silence, a silence filled by letters that crossed the ocean in 3 days. On the other side of the Pacific, Richard Hale stared out over the San Francisco Bay. The war was ending, yet his operation was still running, still carrying the last messages of soldiers who hadn't yet heard the word surrender. Operation Mercury had become more than a mission, it was the heartbeat of connection, keeping distant souls alive in the chaos of ending war. But Hale knew the system couldn't last forever. The fuel lines were running dry, the pilots were exhausted, and the world was about to change in ways no one could imagine. Then came the order that broke him. Washington sent a telegram: cease all flights immediately. Operation classified. Archive and destroy all remaining records. Hale read it twice, unable to breathe. The very system that had reshaped the war was being buried alive, erased from history in the name of secrecy. He called a final meeting with his pilots. There were only 7 left. "They want us to stop," he said quietly. "But there's one last message that needs to be sent." The room fell silent. Hale placed a sealed envelope on the table, its edges marked with red wax. "This isn't from command," he continued. "It's from me. It's meant for them, the men we fought against." The pilots looked at one another in confusion. Hale explained that through intercepted broadcasts, he had learned that a Japanese scientist, Dr. Satoshi Kanda, had tried to protect captured American mail from being destroyed, arguing it represented the future of peace. "He understood what we were doing," Hale said softly. "He saw beyond the war. This letter is for him." That night, under a sky still glowing from distant firestorms, the final Comet courier took off from Guam. The pilot was Captain Owen Reeves, a man who had flown more missions than any other courier. He carried no weapons, only Hale's envelope and a handful of civilian mail bound for families in Tokyo, peace letters written by soldiers before the surrender. His destination was uncertain, but his purpose was clear. On the same night, in a dark corner of Tokyo Bay, Admiral Kuroda and Dr. Kanda stood on a pier, listening to the low hum of distant aircraft. "They're still flying," Kanda murmured. Kuroda clenched his jaw. "Even after victory, they don't stop." But his tone carried no anger anymore. Only awe. Moments later, a faint streak crossed the sky, silver, silent, low. Kuroda lifted his binoculars, tracking it as it disappeared over the horizon. He didn't know it then, but that was Captain Reeves' final flight. Somewhere over Japan's eastern shore, he dropped the envelope using a small parachute fitted with a locator beacon. The note landed in the ruins of a university lab, where Kanda's team worked by candlelight. The next morning, Kanda found it. The envelope was soaked but intact. Inside, written in simple, deliberate handwriting, were just a few lines. "We send letters, not enemies. When you rebuild, remember that distance can divide men or unite them. Choose the latter. R. Hale." Kanda read the note again and again, his eyes stinging. He turned to Kuroda and whispered, "They win because they believe connection is power, not control." Kuroda said nothing. For the first time in his career, he felt small, not because his nation had lost, but because he had misunderstood what it truly meant to communicate. Days later, Japan surrendered. The war ended, and the skies over the Pacific grew quiet. The Comet couriers were dismantled, their engines sold for scrap. Hale was ordered to destroy all blueprints and documents. But he couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he sealed the original flight logs, photographs, and letters in a steel box and buried it beneath a hangar floor at Alameda Airfield. "Someday," he said, "someone will need to know how belief outran distance." Dr. Kanda survived the war and went on to design Japan's first international mail aircraft in 1952. When his engineers asked what inspired him, he told them only this: "There was once a letter that crossed the ocean in 3 days. It changed how I see the world." He never revealed who sent it, nor how it arrived. As the years passed, the story of the 3-day mail became a whisper among historians, a legend too strange to verify, too human to forget. Some dismissed it as wartime myth, others as experimental courier flights lost to secrecy. But those who looked deeper found fragments, unexplained postmarks, half-burned flight manifests, and the same mysterious signature appearing in the margins of old U.S. Postal Service documents: R. Hale. In 1971, when the Alameda hangar was finally demolished, workers unearthed a rusted steel box. Inside were letters, flight charts, and the faded emblem of Operation Mercury, a silver wing wrapped around an envelope. Among the papers was a photograph of young Richard Hale standing beside one of his pilots. On the back, in neat handwriting, he had written, "Speed is not power. Connection is." That photograph now sits in a museum display in Tokyo, next to a small placard written by Dr. Kanda himself before his death. "He sent us a message when the world was ending. We answered by rebuilding it." And so the secret of the 3-day mail lived on, not in military archives or history books, but in every handshake, every flight route, every exchange between nations that once called each other enemies. Because even across oceans of distance, one truth remained: those who dare to connect faster than hate can spread will always change the course of time. Years passed. The world that once burned under war had rebuilt itself into something brighter, faster, and quieter. But beneath that calm surface lived a forgotten pulse, the spirit of a message that had crossed oceans faster than time itself. The story of the 3-day mail became a mystery buried in classified files, whispered among pilots, and passed from one postal worker to another like folklore. There was once a man who believed a letter could fly faster than hate. By the late 1980s, Japan had transformed. Neon lights filled Tokyo's skyline, bullet trains pierced the landscape, and communication had entered the digital age. Yet Dr. Satoshi Kanda, now an old man, still carried a single relic from his youth, the faded letter from Richard Hale. It was stored in a simple wooden frame in his office, next to a model of Japan's first airmail jet. Whenever young engineers visited, Kanda would glance at the letter and smile. "That," he would say softly, "is why you're all here." One rainy afternoon, a young journalist named Emi Watanabe visited him for an interview. She was writing an article titled The Forgotten Fathers of Japanese Aviation. At first, Kanda refused. "My story is not about engines or wings," he told her. "It's about a message that never should have arrived, but did." Her curiosity deepened, and after hours of conversation, the old man finally unlocked a drawer and handed her the letter. Emmy studied it carefully. The paper was brittle, the ink nearly faded, but the name or Hale was still visible. "Who's he?" she asked. Kanda looked out the window, his eyes distant. "An enemy who chose to send hope instead of orders," he said. "He proved that connection is faster than distance." That night, Emmy couldn't sleep. She began searching U.S. archives and military databases, following every trace of the mysterious Operation Mercury. For weeks, she hit dead ends. The operation was listed as non-existent, erased from history. But finally, a declassified memo surfaced from 1945, a single paragraph buried in hundreds of scanned pages. It read, "Project Mercury, unauthorized continuation of courier missions post-ceasefire. Terminated September 2, 1945. Records sealed indefinitely." That was enough for her. She booked a flight to San Francisco to continue her investigation. At the old Alameda airfield, long since converted into a museum, she found an aging caretaker who remembered the excavation of a steel box years ago. "Yeah," the man said, "that box came from under Hangar 12. They said it was just scrap. But I saw what was inside, letters, photos, stuff the government didn't want people talking about." He led her to a glass case at the back of the museum. Inside was the same photograph, Hale standing beside his courier plane, smiling faintly. Beneath it, the small caption read, "Richard Hale, Civilian Communications Officer, Pacific Division, 1944-45. But what caught Emmy's eye wasn't the photo. It was the note taped beside it, donated anonymously by the Hale family, 1972. Her hands trembled. The name that had haunted her search was suddenly real, a family, a legacy. She tracked them down through public records and eventually met Richard's grandson, Daniel Hale, a quiet man who worked as an air traffic controller in Seattle. When she told him her story, Daniel listened silently, then walked to his attic and returned with a small metal box. Inside was another letter, identical handwriting, same wax seal, but this one had never been sent. It read, "If this reaches you, it means our mission was understood. If not, let it serve as proof that we tried to connect the world faster than fear could divide it. R. Hale, August 1945. Emmy felt tears well in her eyes. She asked Daniel if she could publish the story, but he hesitated. "My grandfather didn't do it for credit," he said. "He did it because he believed connection should never need permission." She nodded in understanding. "Then maybe," she said softly, "the world is ready to believe what he believed." Months later, her article was published under the title The 3-Day Mail, How One Letter Crossed an Ocean and Changed the World. It spread quickly, first in Japan, then across the globe. Readers were stunned. Historians debated its accuracy, skeptics dismissed it as embellished myth, but veterans, postal workers, and aviators wrote letters of their own, sharing memories of lost experiments and unrecorded flights. For the first time, the name Richard Hale was spoken in public, not as a soldier, but as a messenger of peace. Dr. Kanda passed away quietly that same year. At his funeral, his family displayed the letter beside his casket. The Japanese Minister of Communications gave a brief eulogy, ending with the words, "He taught us that speed is meaningless without purpose. It is not the flight that matters, but the connection it carries." 2 months later, something remarkable happened. The U.S. and Japanese postal agencies announced a joint initiative, a new high-speed trans-Pacific mail route connecting Tokyo, Honolulu, and San Francisco. They named it Project Mercury 2. On the first flight, the cargo included hundreds of letters written by schoolchildren from both nations, messages of friendship, hope, and peace. And at the very top of the stack, in a protective glass envelope, was a scanned copy of Hale's original message to Kanda. As the aircraft soared above the Pacific, journalists on board noticed a small inscription painted near the cockpit window. It read simply, "For those who believe the letter could outrun war." When the plane landed in Tokyo exactly 3 days later, the crowd erupted in applause. Among them was Emi Watanabe, now holding a press badge over her heart. She whispered, "You did it, Mr. Hale. You really did it." That night, she finished her final report, closing it with these words: "History remembers wars for their destruction, but the future belongs to those who dared to send peace through the fire." 1 letter, 3 days, 2 nations, and a promise that connection will always find its way. And somewhere, in the stillness of the Pacific night, a silver courier's spirit seemed to hum through the clouds, as if the wind itself remembered the flight of a letter that once refused to be late. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.